Hello YouTube, Dave here again, and we are finally coming back to our Through the Ages series on the Ranger class. So we took a bit longer of a break from this than I initially intended to, but we are back. We're going to finish this series off with Essentials, D&D 5th edition, and Pathfinder 2nd edition, so I'm really looking forward to that. Today we are taking a look at the D&D Essentials Ranger. D&D Essentials, for a little bit of a crash course, was sort of meant to be an introductory product to D&D 4th edition, a way of getting new players sort of involved. It was a bit more of a simplified approach to the character classes and abilities, and was also released at a cheaper price point with many of the players' books, the rules compendium, and the other player character race and class books being the sort of pocket edition format styles, which retailed for $23.95 Canadian, which is what I would have paid, or $19.95 US. So for $20, you do get this, pretty beefy player's book, well over 300 pages, and yeah, you don't need the other Heroes book either. You don't need the Heroes of the Fallen Lands in order to be able to play games of D&D Essentials using this particular book. So they were designed that you can either have them both, or you could run games with one or the other, and the selection of character classes kind of reflects that. In this book, we have Druids, Paladins, Rangers, and Warlocks, so we do have a divine character, we do have a martial character, we have more of a skill-based martial character, and we have an arcane character, so you can still fill those traditional roles in your group. So let's take a look at the Ranger class. We're not going to go through every single ability that they do get, because there are two different builds of Ranger that we're going to take a look at, but we're going to at least look at a few of their abilities so to sort of get an idea of what was put into designing their characters. So here we have the Hunter class. So this is the first version of the Ranger presented. There are two. There's the Hunter, which is your archery-based character, and then there is also the Scout, which is your two-weapon fighting based version of the Paladin. Both versions of the class get 12 plus their con score at hit points in first level and 5 hit points every level that they gain thereafter. Both versions of the class gain +1 fortitude and +1 reflex for defense bonuses, and they're both proficient in cloth and leather armor, as well as simple and martial melee weapons, or simple and military, I should say, melee weapons, and simple and military ranged weapons. So taking a look at the Scout, or the Hunter, I should say, sorry, we got the cool Belagos, the iconic 4th edition Drow Ranger, because Drow is one of the playable races in this book. And for abilities, you first have to choose, when you make a Hunter character, if you're going to focus in long or short bows, or if you're going to focus in crossbows, because I actually do give you the crossbow options here as well, which is actually really cool to see. When D&D, traditionally in the past, the hunter version, or like the bow version of a ranger, was pretty much almost always exclusively like long or short bow. So it is cool that they actually do incorporate crossbows into this as well. If you take the bow hunter ability, then you gain the bow expertise feat as a bonus feat, which gives you a +1 to hit and +1 to damage with your bow. Also, that bonus increases to +2 at 11th level and then +3 at 21st level, which is pretty standard for a lot of things in 4th edition. When you go from heroic tier to Paragon tier, many of your abilities get increased slightly, and the same thing happens when you go from Paragon to epic tier. Now, if you take the crossbow hunter, you do get the crossbow expertise feat, which gives you a +1 bonus on attack rolls. And it also gives you the ability to completely ignore the armor bonuses that you might get from cover, both partial and superior cover. So you get to ignore those regardless of how much the cover is, if it's, and we'll see that's actually relevant to an ability coming up here. But also, if your crossbow has the load minor property, so it's basically how long it takes to reload, what type of action it is for you to reload. A minor action, you can do one minor action in a round. It's sort of equivalent to like a bonus action, you might be able to say, in modern day D&D. So if it was a reload that would take the minor action, you can instead do it as a free action, which means if there are things you could do that would allow you to attack multiple times in a given round, then you'd be able to do that, whereas other individuals wielding a crossbow would not be able to, because of the load property of the weapon. First level, you also gained the Expert Archer ability, which gives you 3 different powers. So we do have the Aimed Shot. So this is something that you take. It's an at-will ability, so you can do this an unlimited number of times per day. And essentially, the way that it works is it modifies your basic ranged attack, because the martial characters in D&D Essentials, many of their abilities and features would work in a way that modify the basic attacks rather than being their own separate attacks like they were in the hardcover books. So with the aim shot, you make a ranged basic attack with the weapon, ignoring penalty to attack rolls imposed by partial cover and partial concealment. In addition, the penalty to attack rolls imposed by superior cover and total concealment is no worse than -2 for this roll. So it kind of overlaps with the crossbow expertise feat. However, with the crossbow expertise, you ignore you ignore the armor bonus completely, right? You ignore it, or the attack penalty, I should say, you ignore it completely. Whereas with this one, it still would give you up to a -2 penalty for total cover or concealment. So it's not quite as good as the crossbow one. But if you take the bow archery, then you can at least ignore some versions of cover and concealment. Then you also get Clever Shot. So this again is an at-will martial ability. The effect, you make a ranged basic attack with the weapon. If the attack hits, the target is also subject to one of the following effects of your choice. You slide the target up to 2 squares. So slide can be in any direction. If it says shove the target or push the target, I forget the exact ability that they refer to in 4th edition. It has to be directly away, but if it's slide, you can choose however you want. You could have the target fall prone, or the target could be slowed. Then you also get Rapid Shot, which is a nice callback to D&D 3rd edition with the 3.5 with the Ranger. So what you do here is you make a ranged basic attack with the weapon against each creature in or adjacent to a square within the attack's range. You take a -2 penalty to the attack rolls. So in 3.5, Rapid Shot was just 2 attacks. Both would be at a -2 penalty, but with this one, you choose a space on the battlefield, and you get to basically attack anybody that's adjacent to it. So Rapid Shot can actually get pretty decent. At first level, you also get Disruptive Shot. It reads, as the battle rages around you, sometimes you spot a perfect moment to unleash a devastating shot. A foe might lose track of you for a moment, or it might notice that a slight crack in the enemy's helm is the perfect spot for a shot that glances off its skull. Your skill with the bow allows you to take advantage of such opportunities. So it is an encounter ability. You get to use it once per fight, and then after battle ends, you can take a quick rest, I think it's 5 or 10 minutes in 4th edition, and then the next time you get into an encounter, you'll have the ability again. They typically tend to be a bit more powerful than standard abilities, and we'll have some other conditions with them as well. So we'll take a look here. So this is a martial ability, takes a standard action, and requires a ranged weapon. You target one creature with Dex versus Armor class. If you hit, you do your normal weapon damage plus your Dex modifier, and you can choose to have the target either be immobilized or dazed. The weapon damage increases at level 17 and at level 27. So at 17, you do 2 weapon dice. So if your weapon did 1d8, when you get to 27th level, it would do 2d8 plus your Dex modifier plus the additional effects. And at level 27, it would be 3d8 plus your Dex modifier plus the additional effect. But because this is an encounter ability, even if you miss, you still deal half damage, and the target is slowed until the end of your next turn. At level 1, you also get Weapon Talent. Your training with weapons grants you superior accuracy. You gain a +1 bonus to the attack rolls of weapon attacks, and that will stack with things like the bow expertise. So it actually, it gives you, again, increasingly better chances to hit with your weapons. And then at level 1, you also get Aspects of the Wild. So these are effectively what they are stances. And stances are something that does take one form of action in order to enter them, but when you're in a stance during an encounter, you continuously gain the benefit of whatever the stance is, unless something forces you out of it, if you're knocked unconscious, or if you're somehow immobilized, or if you decide to drop the one that you're currently in to assume a different stance. So again, it's sort of a continuous abilities that you get. So we get Aspect of the Cunning Fox, which is a minor action to enter. And the effect says you assume a stance, the aspect of the Cunning Fox. Until the stance ends, you gain the following benefits. You take only half damage from attacks made against you during your turn, or and whenever you hit or miss with a melee or ranged weapon attack on your turn, you can take a free action to shift up to 2 squares. There's aspect of the Dancing Serpent. So again, it's a stance that gives you the following benefits. You can take a free action at the end of each of your turns to shift 1 square, or when you make a basic attack against an enemy that has none of its allies adjacent to it, you gain a +1 power bonus to the attack roll and damage roll, with that increase going up to +2 at 11th level and +3 at 21st level. There is also aspect of the Pouncing Lynx. So when you assume this stance, you gain the following benefits. You gain a +4 power bonus to initiative checks. During your first turn in an encounter, you gain a +2 power bonus to attack rolls. You gain a power bonus to all defenses against opportunity attacks that you provoke by moving, and that bonus equals your wisdom modifier. There is aspect of the Lone Wolf. When you assume the stance, you gain the following benefits. When you make a basic attack against a bloodied enemy, bloodied being an enemy that's been reduced to half their maximum hit point total or below, you get a +2 power bonus to the attack roll, and at the start of each of your turns, you learn the location of every hidden bloodied enemy within 5 squares of you. Bloodied is something that I really wish 4th edition, or 5th edition I should say, I really wish that's something that they would have kept. Because it was just sort of a unique mechanic. For certain creatures, they would enter kind of a desperation phase where it would grant them other abilities, like a dragon, for example. When it's reduced to bloodied value for the first time in a fight, it gets to immediately make a free breath weapon attack against, whoever's within range of it. Beholders had like this aura that they could activate when they were bloodied, where they would just fire their eye rays off at random, which unfortunately became the default way that Beholders attacked in 5th edition, which is kind of dumb, but anyway, I'm not here to talk about that in this video. But it is still kind of cool that, again, the bloodied ability was something that was actually really well done, I think, in 4th edition D&D. There's also aspect of the Lurking Spider, which I don't like, so we're probably just going to move on. No, I'm going to read the benefits. You gain a +2 power bonus to stealth checks. You gain a +5 power bonus to athletics checks made to climb. While you have combat advantage against an enemy, you gain a +2 power bonus to damage rolls against it, with that increasing to +3 at 11th level and +4 at 21st level. Then there's aspect of the Pack Wolf. So you assume the stance. Until the stance end, you gain the following benefits. You do not provoke opportunity attacks when leaving squares adjacent to your allies. When you make a basic attack against an enemy adjacent to 2 or more of your allies, you gain a +1 power bonus to the attack roll. You also gain a power bonus to the damage roll against that enemy. The power bonus equals the number of allies you have adjacent to the enemy. At 11th level, the bonus to damage increases to 1 plus the number of adjacent allies to that target. And at 21st level, it goes up to 2 plus the number of adjacent allies. So it's kind of neat. Like the Hunter has some class features that you can take that essentially you benefit from the target being isolated. And then there's other ones where if you are kind of swarming a target, then it actually has greater benefit, which is really great against like solo monsters. I should also mention that when you gain the aspect of the wild, you choose 2 from the following list. So you don't get all of those abilities. You choose 2 from the list though. And I think as you go through levels, you also start to, you can gain like extra ones as you go along. And also, we're still on level 1. So also at level 1, we've got Wilderness Knack. So this was something that was actually really lacking from the original 4th edition Ranger. They were primarily a martial character because the primal source power didn't exist until the second Player's Handbook to come out. And I really wish that they would have held off on the Ranger for the Player's Handbook too. I think the Bard would have been better suited in the original Player's Handbook, and the Ranger would have benefited from having like primal ability similar to the Druid and the Barbarian. But we actually do have these Wilderness Knacks sort of built into the character here for the D&D Essentials Ranger. So at first level, you get to choose 2 of the following abilities of your choice. There's Ambush Expertise. So it says whenever you make a stealth check, each ally within 10 squares or within 50 feet of you, in this case, gains a +2 bonus to his or her next stealth check before the end of your next turn. So this is a great ability if you're trying to, again, move quietly through an area, and you might have some individuals in the party that are going to be bad at that. It helps sort of cover their tracks, which is kind of cool. You get Beast Empathy as an option you can choose as well. You gain a +2 bonus to bluff, diplomacy, and intimidate checks against beasts. You can communicate simple concepts and commands to such creatures, though they are under no compulsion to obey you. With a successful insight check, DC determined by the DM, you can read a creature's body language and vocalizations enough to understand basic messages from it. So again, that's a really cool ability to actually communicate with creatures without having to actually like have it be a spell or something like that. And you're still having to interpret it using like skill checks. I just thought that was a really cool ability. You can also choose Mountain Guide. Whenever you succeed on an athletics check to climb, you reduce the DC of that climb by 2 for your allies until the end of the encounter. Only allies who see you make the climb gain this benefit. There's Watchful Rest. When you take an extended rest, you and your allies taking the rest do not take the -5 to perception checks for sleeping. That can be a really good one. Wilderness Tracker. During a short rest, you can make a perception check, DC determined by the DM, to inspect the area around you. This area can be as large as 10 squares or 50 feet on a side. If your check succeeds, you determine the number and nature of creatures that have moved through the area in the last 24 hours. You ascertain when and where they entered the area, as well as when and where they left the area. So again, kind of a cool ability to have there. Now, last thing we're going to look at is just a couple of their utility abilities. And we're going to kind of move on to the scout, but we're sort of getting an idea of some of the features that they get. And with Essentials, again, the more martially oriented characters, they get most of their abilities at first level. And then as they progress through their levels, they get things that might improve their existing class features. Like, for example, the improved Disruptive Shot. You can use it now only once per round, but you can use it twice per encounter. So you kind of get stuff like that, or again, the ability to gain another wilderness knack, things along those lines. So that's the majority of, but we will take a look at some of these utility abilities again. Utility powers are not meant to be like combat specific stuff or damage dealing. They're meant to be more things that can sort of help you along the way, things that might help you detect traps or set traps up, things that might help boost your defenses, things along those lines. So with the Ranger, the Hunter, they get the Bridge of Roots. So this is an area burst 2 within 10 squares. So a burst, you pick a point and on the map, and basically it goes out 10 feet or 2 squares in all directions from that point. And because it creates a zone, it stays on the battlefield for a certain period of time. So it says the burst creates a zone that lasts until the end of the encounter. At least 1 square of the zone must be on a solid surface. You and your allies can ignore hindering terrain and difficult terrain in the zone. In addition, any portion of a pit, chasm, or similar feature within the zone becomes safe, passable ground. So that's pretty cool. It's as a move action, you can move the zone up to 5 squares, keeping it at least 1 square on solid surface. So again, that's kind of neat. You can take things like, foliage and fallen branches or stuff like that, or even brambles or anything along those lines, and you can actually make it something that is safe to pass through, which is kind of cool. Entangling Roots. So for Entangling Roots, again, it's the same area of effect, and it says the burst creates a zone that lasts until the end of the encounter. The ground in the zone is difficult terrain for your enemies. When an enemy charges, its movement cannot include any square of the ground in the zone. So you have the Bridge of Roots to help you, or Entangling Roots to mess with your opponents. And I believe you choose one of these powers. And then there is Stalker's Mist. So this is an area burst 1 within 10 squares. The burst creates a zone that lasts until the end of the encounter. Squares in the zone are heavily obscured to your enemies. So kind of like the Obscuring Mist spell. And it's just sort of like you pick a point on the map and it's every square or 5 feet around it. So pretty cool stuff. And overall, yeah, interesting abilities. They did tie a lot more aspects of nature into the character with the wilderness knacks, and then some of the other abilities like aspects of the wild that you get to choose from. So yeah, there's some really cool stuff. They did make the Ranger class a little bit more nature oriented, which is something that people were really looking for when it came to the 4th edition Ranger. And at 11th level, you do enter the Paragon tier, and in addition to normal class abilities that you may gain, you also do gain a Paragon path. I think there's just the one path that is presented here in this book, but in other books, or even in like the hardcover D&D 4th edition books, there were other Paragon paths to choose. And one thing to note is that the Essentials books and the hardcover books are fully backwards compatible with one another. So you can choose options outside of these as well if you wanted to. But I would recommend, if you were to play this, I would recommend sticking to the specific characters created in these books. But the Paragon path is the Peerless Archer. So at 11th level, they gain the Hunter's Action. So when you spend an action point to make an attack, you can re-roll each attack roll that you make before the end of your turn, and you must use the second roll every time. So this is kind of interesting. It's sort of an early version of what is known as Advantage in modern D&D. And you would gain action points throughout the course of the game session, and like I said, you would just use them to take an extra action, be it like a basic attack, or a movement, or some other ability. So at Paragon levels, they typically give you something that gives you an extra benefit when you use those action points. And you also get the Disruptive Shot, so you gain one more use of Disruptive Shot per encounter. But you can still only use it once per turn. So at 11th level, you get up to the point where you can use it 3 times per encounter instead of just once, but you can only use it once in a given round. So again, pretty cool stuff there. And we're just going to move on from the Hunter Ranger, and we're going to move on to the Scout. So again, pretty much everything that the Hunter had, it's pretty similar to the Scout, although it looks like the Scout actually gets 1 extra healing surge per day versus the Archer, the Hunter, which only had 6. So let's just take a quick look at that. Yeah, so the Hunter only gets 6 healing surges plus their con modifier per day. The Scout gets 7. Although the Scout is a melee character, so it does make sense that they would be a little bit hardier because they'd likely be taking more damage, whereas the Hunter Ranger is more trying to maintain their distance as they get into combat. All right, so moving on to their abilities. Similar to the Hunter Ranger, the Scout Ranger also gets to choose what type of weapons they are going to focus on. So, where before you had bow or crossbow, here you get flashing blade or spinning axe. So you can take basically blades like swords or hand axes, battle axes, things like that. So you actually get the 2 different options. If you choose the flashing blade mastery, you gain a +1 bonus to attack rolls while you wield a light weapon in your offhand. And with the spinning axe, you gain a +2 bonus to damage rolls when you wield an axe in your offhand. Now, keep in mind, in 4th edition D&D, having a secondary weapon usually didn't get to attack with both, although that will be different for the Ranger class in particular. Giving the Ranger, once again, if they take the 2-weapon fighting style, it makes them better 2-weapon fighters than other character classes, which is kind of nice to see them have that ability over the other classes. So it's kind of nice that they actually get to be the best at something again. But normally I think you would be able to do like a +1 bonus to damage or something like that, or +1 to defense if you had an offhand weapon. But here you actually get the dual attack ability. So it is a special at-will melee attack. The requirement is you must be wielding 2 weapons, and the trigger is that you hit with a basic attack on your turn. So you do have to hit with 1 weapon in order to attack with the other. It says in the flavor text, you follow your successful swing with a quick strike from your offhand, and it targets 1 creature, and it does a dexterity versus armor class, and 1 weapon dice plus your dex modifier. And you can only use this power once per round, but it is, again, an extra attack that you get to make if you hit with your first one. At first level, you also get attack finesse. So the benefit, when you make a melee basic attack, you can use your dexterity modifier instead of your strength modifier for the attack and damage roll, which again, dexterity is one of the ranger's better abilities. So it's nice that they get to do that, and it doesn't specify like only a particular type of weapon. It's just, when you make a melee basic attack, you can use your dex modifier instead of strength on the attack and damage roll. So again, that's really cool to see. You also get Power Strike at first level. So Power Strike is an encounter ability. It does require a trigger, so this is a sort of a reactionary ability. The trigger is you hit with a basic melee strike using a weapon. The target is the enemy that you strike, and the effect is the target takes 1 weapon extra damage from the triggering attack. So the flavor text says, by pushing yourself beyond your normal limits, you unleash your full wrath against a foe. So if you hit, you get to activate that once per encounter, and you just get to deal extra damage without having to make an extra attack roll. So again, pretty cool to see. And then we get our aspects of the wild once again. Now, several of these are going to be the same. For example, aspect of the cunning fox, aspect of the dancing serpent. So I'm not going to reread those abilities, but there are a few different ones that are in here as well. And I should also note that because this is the ranger class, it is presenting 2 different builds, but you can choose between different abilities from, if you're a hunter, you can take some class features from the scout if you wanted to, like some of these aspects of the wild, for example, or the some of the other abilities like the wilderness knacks. Like you can sort of choose back and forth between the 2 classes if you want to, but once again, they do reprint certain things that apply to both versions of the class. And the abilities that are presented for the scout that aren't in the hunter's ability may not work super well with the ranger's abilities because they might not be compatible with the weapons that the character has. But it is an option that you do actually have that's available to you. So we also have aspect of the charging ram. So this is a stance, and when you enter it, you gain the following benefits. Your movement during a charge does not provoke opportunity attacks. If you hit with the charge attack, you can knock your target prone, and you gain a +2 power bonus to damage rolls of charge attacks. There's aspect of the hungry shark. So when you enter that stance, you gain the following benefits. When you make a basic attack against a bloodied enemy, so this is kind of like the wolf one as well, it does target bloodied enemies a little bit here. You gain a +2 power bonus on the attack roll. When you can take a move action to shift up to 3 squares to an adjacent bloodied enemy. And you gain a +5 power bonus to athletics checks made to swim. There's aspect of lurking spider, which we did see. Aspect of the pack wolf, which we also did see, which again also works really well for the scout version. There's also aspect of the regal lion, which when you enter the stance, when you make a basic attack against an enemy that is large or larger, you gain a +2 power bonus to the attack roll, and you gain a +2 power bonus to all defenses against such enemies, so enemies that are of the large size or larger. Then finally, we have aspect of the soaring hawk. So when you're in that stance, you gain a +2 power bonus to speed. You can ignore the penalty to attack rolls opposed by partial cover and partial concealment, and you take no worse than a -2 penalty to attack rolls against targets that have superior cover or total concealment, and you gain a +2 bonus to perception checks. So you also get your wilderness knacks. I believe these are all the wilderness knacks I think are pretty much the exact same as what we had before. You also have the wilderness tracker. So it says during a short rest, you can make a perception check to inspect the area around you. So that's pretty much the exact same ability that we had before. Their utility powers are a little bit different here, and then we're going to just move on to the Paragon path, and then we'll wrap it up. So they get oak skin. So you gain resistance to all damage until the end of the encounter. The resistance equals your wisdom modifier. So you just basically, when you use this ability at the until the end of the encounter, whenever you're hit by any ability that deals damage to you, be it a spell, weapon attacks, other supernatural abilities, you gain resistance to all, so you take off a certain number. It's not quite like resistance in 5th edition where it's half. It's a set value. And you also had like vulnerabilities that work the same way, but again, that's another subject for another video. You have a ranger's agility. So it says until the end of the encounter, you gain a +2 power bonus to speed, And whenever you shift, the distance you shift increases by 1 square. And then you have Safe Passage. Until the end of the encounter, each target ignores difficult terrain and gains a +2 power bonus to speed. All right, so moving on to the Paragon path now. For the Scout, you get the Intrepid Scout, and they get their Scout's action. So when you spend an action point to take an extra action, you can shift up to your speed before or after taking the extra action. So with the Hunter's action was related specifically to making an extra attack using your action point. But with the Scout's action, it doesn't matter what sort of action you take with that point, be it a move action or whatever, you get to shift automatically before or after doing the ability. And so if you wanted to get away, then you have ability to move further away, or if you're trying to close in, you can close in further, or you can make like a hit and run type of attack. And shifting is also something that, again, you don't provoke attacks of opportunity when doing that. And then there's Scout's mobility, so the Scout gains a +1 bonus to speed, and then they just start increasing some of their other abilities as well as they progress through their levels. So that was my look at the D&D Essentials Ranger. Like I said, we didn't go over every single ability that the characters get, just because there'd be a lot to sort of go over there. Although with Essentials, they do gain fewer abilities, so we did go over the vast majority of what they get. And you do get to see that there is a bit more of a wilderness theme to the characters, which is something that the Player's Handbook version was lacking. Just the addition of the aspects of the wild or the wilderness knacks make a really big difference, sort of taking on aspects of different animals or creatures to assist you in the way that you fight, like your fighting style. I thought that was kind of a cool thing to do, because, you know, Rangers being masters of the wild would sort of note how different types of wild creatures, how they attack, how they strike, how they interact with others. And it's kind of cool to see that they actually incorporate some of that into their abilities here in Essentials. And I would say that if you're looking to play a Ranger in a 4th edition D&D game, my main recommendation would be to look at the Ranger classes from the Heroes of the Forgotten Kingdoms before looking at the Player's Handbook version of the Ranger, or even the Beastmaster Ranger. The Beastmaster was kind of cool because they had the animal companion, which unfortunately is still lacking in the Essentials book, but Essentials was meant to be an introductory product, so they did try to keep some of the abilities a little bit more streamlined and beginner friendly, less stuff for you to have to keep track of, sort of thing. So I think overall that the Essentials Ranger, the Hunter, and or Scout are the best versions of the Ranger class that we got in D&D 4th edition. So that was the complete 4th edition of Ranger class discussions. We took a look at the Player's Handbook Ranger, we took a look at the Beastmaster Ranger from the Martial Power book, and we finally looked at the Hunter and the Scout from the 4th edition Essentials line. So be sure to join me in the next video in this series, which will be releasing in January of 2023, when we jump, I hope I didn't spoil anything there, when we jump into D&D 5th edition to see how the Ranger class fares there. Oh boy. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Until then, take care.